Hi, I'm Belinda Carley, Director of the Institute of Personal Care Science, and today I'm going to show you how to make mists and gels. We're going to start with a very simple mist formula first of all. Now in this particular sample I'm going to be using materials that come as part of our practical activity kits, but I'm also using these materials because it helps me show you the most simple method of creating mists and gels using a variety of different gum or polymer agents. So first of all we'll start by creating the mist and then we'll turn that into a very simple gel. I've got my water phase already measured out. Now I'm just going to add glycerin to my water phase. One of the really important things to add to your mist, your toner or your gel is a humectant. Humectants will keep the skin looking really supple and they're also water soluble. Give that a little stir just to make it homogeneous, evenly dispersed. Now I'm going to measure out my oil phase. Now this is really important that you do it in this method. So I'm first measuring out my solubilizer. And then I'm just adding some essential oil. Now you could add fragrance. In this case, I'm adding essential oil. And of course I've added an essential oil, so I must make sure I add some antioxidant. Now this is the crucial part. I need to make sure that this is homogeneously, evenly mixed before I add it to the water phase. And this is because my solubilizer needs to solubilize my oil portion before I add it to water. Otherwise, I'll get free oil just sitting on the top of my water. And then I just add this slowly into my water phase. Now to this I'm just going to add some preservative. Now you can see this toner's a little cloudy looking. And that is mainly because in this particular formula I have used a relatively high proportion of essential oil and antioxidant compared to the solubilizer. It won't separate out, it will continue to look this cloudy mixture for its entire shelf life. And when you've solubilized something properly, if you've used a very high proportion of solubilizer to the oil, you can get a very clear mist or toner. In this particular case, because I've used essential oils, I would need to use a lot more solubilizer than I have to get a clear product, which I didn't want to do. I'm doing this more for example purposes so that you can see the method that you need to use to create what is a very simple mist product. Now, one final step would be to adjust the pH, and then I could pour this product off, and like I say, it would remain looking like that for its entire shelf life because I've used at least a minimum amount of solubilizer to oil ratio. If I wanted a clearer product, like I say, I can use more solubilizer again and keep the lipid ratio where it is. Now, from this example, like I say, if I was finished making a mist, I could adjust pH and that would be it. But from this particular sample, I am now going to make a gel. So when you're making a gel product, you're basically doing the same thing as making your mist or toner first. You're adding your lipid phase, so your solubilized lipids, into your water phase, and then we're going to gel it. So in this particular example, I am going to use a polymer, a carbomer polymer, to show you how easy to use these materials are. Of course, these are not at all natural, so it depends on what your company philosophy is as to whether you want to use a natural substance. Now, one of the reasons I'm adding this after I've already solubilized my oils is because polymers are very sensitive to too much mixing. So we don't want to over mix the product once we've added our polymer. So for that reason, I've solubilized my oils, added my oils first, and then I'm adding my polymer. Now you'll see it goes in looking a little clumpy. That's perfectly normal with a polymer. When you're using different gums and thickness, it's really important that you remember method is crucial. Different gums and polymers have different methods to hydrate them. So that's why I'm going to show you a couple of examples in this video, because they all have different methods to be properly hydrated. Now in the lab you can't help but make a few bubbles because your solubilizer, of course, is a very active surfactant substance. These bubbles will come out when the product is rested for even a short period of time. What I'm doing first with my polymer is making sure that I've evenly dispersed the polymer material. It will not hydrate fully until I neutralize it, but what I want to make sure first of all is that it is evenly spread, or relatively evenly spread, throughout the base product. Now as you can see, that is still quite runny. Still quite runny like water, in fact. But now we're going to neutralize it and you're going to see just how much it thickens. And you can see it's starting to form a gel. I'm going to add a little bit more neutralizing agent and we'll get it even thicker again. And you can see I'm stirring quite gently now. One very important thing you need to remember when working with polymers, because they are sensitive to high shear or fast mixing, and then they just won't gel. Now after we've let it settle, you'll see that the polymer has gelled completely, so hopefully you can see that's turned into a nice viscous gel. So polymers are very easy to use, but make sure you do not expose them to high shear. They always require slower, more gentle stirring. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to use xanthan gum. Xanthan gum is a natural thickener, very easy to use, but again, when using different gums and polymers, method is crucial. So I'm going to show you how to make a basic gel today, just with xanthan gum as your gelling agent. So I've already got my water phase measured out. Now I'm going to make a slurry with my glycerin and xanthan. Now this is really important that you add your xanthan very carefully, otherwise you'll end up with what we call fish eyes, and fish eyes are highly undesirable. They won't come out. You'll have to start again. So I like the slurry method. It means we can add our xanthan gum using a cold process. We don't need to heat it, and we will still very effectively hydrate the xanthan gum evenly. So one of the first important steps when using xanthan gum is to make sure that you make a nice, smooth, even slurry. Very important, it should be evenly dispersed in the slurry. Now we add this slowly to our water phase. And xanthan gum will always have a bit of a hazy appearance unless you were to purchase a very particular grade of xanthan that will make very transparent mixes. So you'll always get a bit of a haze look when using xanthan gum. And of course you see me using quite basic equipment here. If you have access to more advanced lab equipment, you can of course by all means use it. I'm using the more simple equipment here for those of you who only have access to home facilities. But in doing so, hopefully I can demonstrate how easy these materials are to use. Now compared to the polymer, you've probably noticed I'm stirring this quite vigorously compared to when I'm using carbomer, and that's because xanthan is not shear sensitive. I'm going to set that aside, and I'm just going to solubilize my oil phase. So again, to solubilize my oil phase, adding my oil to my solubilizer first, and my antioxidant. I'm mixing that first, making sure that's very evenly mixed. And again, this will cause some bubbles. So So I need to be careful of my mixing now, more because I don't want to aerate my formula too much. And then finally add some preservative. Stir that through, and then the final steps would be to check and adjust the pH. Now when you're checking your pH, you need to move your pH meter through the solution. This pH is still quite high, so I'm just going to take that down with a little bit of citric acid. And you can never know exactly how much acid or alkalizer to use when you're adjusting final pH. One drop may make a big change, one drop may make hardly any change at all. And so in this case you can now see we have a low viscosity gel. One of the things that's important to note about using xanthan is it does not gel up thick like a carbomer will, but at the same time carbomer is not at all natural. So if you're wanting to create a natural gum, you will need to use a combination of natural gumming agents, because you don't want to use too much xanthan gum in a leave-on product either, otherwise it can feel quite tacky and sticky on the skin. So at this much xanthan, it would still feel quite nice on the skin, but obviously this may not be the viscosity that you require for your product, so then you'd need to use a combination of natural gums to achieve the required viscosity. Now finally, I'm going to show you how to hydrate a cellulose derivative effectively and create a gel. In this case, I'm using hydroxyethyl cellulose. One of the important things to make sure that you do when you're using cellulose derivatives is either expose them to high shear for a prolonged period of time, or if you're in a home-based setup, you may not have access to that type of equipment. So I'm going to show you a simpler way to hydrate your cellulose derivatives today, and that is to alkalize them. So I've got my water phase first, and just my water to this. I'm just adding some glycerin. Again, a really important addition to any type of gel base is to use a humectant, because it will impart that moisturized, lasting moisturized feel and suppleness. And now I'm adding my hydroxyethyl cellulose. And one of the things you'll notice with cellulose derivatives is I'm not needing to slurry it. It will go straight in. It's been hydrophilically modified to go straight into the formula, straight into water, but it does have an extended gel time, which is why we either need to use high shear for prolonged periods of time or alkalize it, which is what I'm going to show you today. So you can see so far it's been added, it's dispersed evenly, but it has not at all swirled. I'm not sure if you can see on the video there that there is quite a bit of powder still at the base of this product. So now to alkalize it, just adding a few drops of sodium hydroxide. Now it doesn't matter if I've taken it the pH a bit high. All I really needed to do at this point was to alkalize my gum so that it will hydrate, and you can see straight away it's turned clear and I have now created a gel form. So hopefully you can see how easy the alkalizing method is when hydrating a cellulose derivative. Again, method is crucial when you're using your gums in formulas, so make sure you have the right method for the gum or polymer that you're planning to use. Now to finish this product off, I'm going to solubilize and add an oil phase. And again, when solubilizing that oil phase, I need to make sure that I do mix it very thoroughly first before adding it to my water phase, which as you can see is now a very thick gel. But again, I add this slowly to the water phase. I'm now going to add some preservative. And finally going to adjust the pH, because remember it's been alkalized, so the current pH will be quite high. So I need to bring it back down. Now with a cellulose derivative this won't matter, but very importantly, when you use a polymer like a carbomer, you can't adjust that final pH. Once you've made it thick, check the pH. As long as it's not adverse to the skin, do not adjust the pH. Otherwise you will thin out your formula, you'll lose that beautiful gel that your carbomer or your polymers form. But with a cellulose derivative it doesn't matter. So just adjusted that back down. And as you can see, we've got a beautiful thick gel. Now cellulose derivatives, unlike xanthan, will not tend to feel tacky and sticky on the skin. This one does have a few bubbles in it. If I was making a larger batch, introducing air wouldn't become such a problem. If I let that settle overnight or a couple of days, all those bubbles would come out and I'd be left with a beautifully clear gel. So remember, when you're using polymers, you need to add your polymer, disperse it evenly, and then neutralize it. When you're making a gel using xanthan gum, you need to add the xanthan gum. Probably best method is a slurry method. And then if you're using a cellulose derivative, you need to alkalize it to help it swell fast. And don't forget, when you're adding your oil phase, you need to solubilize this first and then add slowly to the water phase. And always check and adjust pH at the end, except when you're using a carbomer or polymer. You would check the pH, but you wouldn't adjust it, otherwise you'll lose your viscosity.